All right, so book two of Paradise Lost is pretty long. So fortunately, it breaks into basically two sections. So I'll break the lecture into two sections as well. Um, so the first part of this is the arguments being made uh, by Satan's chief advisors, right? He says in 41 and 42, whether open war or covert guile we now debate, who can advise may speak. So he's already said, right, our choice has been made for us. We have to have war against God, either open or covert. So what's it going to be? The first one to speak up is Moloch, who we're told is basically a warrior. And he says he's for open war. His basic argument is that things can't get any worse than they already are, and probably the result of open war against God is, as he says in 92 and 93, more destroyed than thus we should be quite abolished and expire. In other words, if we make open war on God, we're basically going to give him no choice but to completely obliterate us. And if we're completely obliterated, no more suffering. That's better than what's happened to us now. Belial is the second one to speak. We're told in line 110 that he seemed composed, but that all was false and hollow. So Belial is a liar. He is essentially a silky politician, right? And his argument, we're told, is, well, his is a bit difficult, but basically, he says he'd be for open war, except he's not particularly interested in this whole business of being completely obliterated. He says Moloch wants war basically just to lose and be done with everything. He sees that as a poor choice. Yeah, he says in line 146, to be no more, sad cure, right? Great line. He goes on then to say, right, in 154, 155, how he can is doubtful, that he never will is sure, referencing this idea that they don't even know if God can completely destroy them, obliterate them, unmake them, and that if he could, who knows if that's actually going to be his response, right? It's pretty interesting because, Moloch says he can't imagine anything being worse. Belial says, well, I can imagine some things. Right? He says in line 162, what can we suffer worse? Is this then worst? Thus sitting, thus consulting, thus in arms? Is this the worst you can imagine? That sounds like Faustus, right? Faustus says to Mephistopheles, if this be hell, fine. What? Walking? Conversing? That's great, right? Go back and look at that from Faustus. So this is what Belial's point is, right? Like, well, this doesn't seem so bad. You can't imagine anything worse. He says, what when we fled amain, pursued and struck with heaven's afflicting thunder, and besought the deep to shelter us, this hell then seemed a refuge from those wounds. Or when we lay chained on the burning lake, that sure was worse. What if the breath that kindled those grim fires, awaked, should blow them into sevenfold rage and plunge us into the flames? Or from above should intermitted vengeance arm again his red right hand to plague us? What if all her stores were opened, and this firmament of hell should spout her cataracts of fire? Impotent horrors, threatening, hideous, fall one day upon our heads, while we perhaps designing or exhorting glorious war, caught in a fiery tempest, shall be hurled, each on his rock, transfixed, the sport and prey of racking whirlwinds, or forever sunk under yon boiling ocean, wrapped in chains, there to converse with everlasting groans, unrespited, unpitied, unreprieved, ages of hopeless end. This would be worse. Belial's got a great imagination. Man, I can think of a lot of things worse than where we are right now, so sorry, Moloch. I'll take this over obliteration. War, therefore, open or concealed alike, my voice dissuades, for what can force or guile? So he's arguing no war at all. He goes on to say that the punishment they've received is just because of what they did, which is true. And his argument, he expounds on, is that in line, say, starting in 208, this is now our doom, which if we can sustain and bear, our supreme foe in time may much remit his anger, and perhaps, thus far removed, not mind us offending, satisfied with what is punished. In other words, if we just stay here, out of sight, out of mind, and don't antagonize God, it's entirely possible that he will forget about us, and we can make a halfway decent life here. No war, no thank you. Belial then finishes, and the next to speak is Mammon. Right, and we're told here that what Belial is counseling is not peace, but sloth. Right. It's not, he doesn't want peace with God. That is, he doesn't want reconciliation. He just wants to sit around and do nothing until God maybe forgets about them. Because he's God and other things are happening, right? So, Mammon then speaks up, and Mammon has an interesting proposition, and it turns out to be one that actually gains a lot of momentum. He basically says, let's make the best of a bad situation. He says in line 249, let us not then pursue by force impossible, by leave attained unacceptable, though in heaven our state of splendid vassalage, but rather seek our own good from ourselves, and from our own live to ourselves. Right? This sounds a lot like Satan saying it's better to reign in hell than to serve in heaven, right? And that's basically what Mammon is saying here is let's make the best of a bad situation. He says in 255 that they're free and to none accountable, preferring hard liberty before the easy yoke of servile pomp, right? Again, better to rule free in hell than to serve under a tyrannical God in heaven. And he goes on to talk about how, if they spend enough time in hell, they'll get used to the heat and the fire and the darkness, and surely they can find the resources they need to survive, and so on and so forth. So he closes his in 283, 84, right? Dismissing quite all thoughts of war, ye have what I advise. The response to this then in 290 is such applause was heard as Mammon ended in his sentence, pleased advising peace. They like this idea. This seems to be the one of the three that they're going to go with. Beelzebub then speaks up and says, the popular vote inclines here to continue and build up here a growing empire. That's 313 to 315. Doubtless, he says. Doubtless. Not going to happen. He goes on to expound that God is still king in heaven and in hell, and he will not abide their comfort there. that if we choose not to attack God, if we choose to make the best of a bad situation here, and we here make ourselves comfortable, God will see that, and he will not allow this, because this is punishment. He says in 3:30, war hath determined us. Terms of peace, yet none. Right? It's not an option. The problem is, of course,